I think cities need to work on communities and let communities take care of their people. Don't overstep the communities and then try to take care of the people directly. Government doesn't know what the people need. Too disconnected. Let's talk a little bit about the homelessness and the encampments that are happening, at least in and around Hamilton. I know it's happening in Toronto too. It's happening in a lot of places, right? But we see it a lot in Hamilton, places that we've been working on. I want to touch on a few things that we've seen happening. I think one of the recent things I feel we can address is the encampments that are happening in the Bayfront, in the north end of Hamilton, right? Where they're going to be building, or they have intentions at least to build those tiny homes to accommodate some of the people who are setting up encampments there, right? Okay, so what do you think of that?
I think it is a great idea. Now, why I think that is that because I believe that in Canada, you should have the right to do whatever you want. If you want to sleep in a tent, you should have a right. If you want to do drugs, you should have a right. Because I really do believe we live in the best country in the world. Doing it on the Tiffany lands to the north end of Hamilton is the worst idea. And there's a good reason why. Waterloo Kitchener did the same type of HATS program, okay? But they did it a 15-minute walk from the nearest bus stop. They're in a fenced-off community. There's 50 tiny homes there. You know the worst part about these encampments?
Yeah.
It's not the people that live in the tents.
What's the worst part?
The visitors.
Oh.
That come there and visit the people in tents. That's where all the stabbings and shootings happen.
Yeah.
And they try to rob people, and they look for all their stolen goods, and they're selling drugs. You seen Woodlands Park? The best thing for a drug dealer, do laps. We just do laps. That's it. It's the easiest thing. The best thing, you do it out of the city. The people that want to be there, that actually need housing, are actually living in the tents. Because I truly do believe there are some people that actually need housing, and they're living in a tent because they're on tough luck. They belong 15 minutes away in a farmer's field where they can get a shuttle from, these certain hours, and they get a little, storage container type unit. So I do think we're in desperate need of housing.
Has anyone or any place that you know of done something like that?
Waterloo
did that.
Yeah,
okay.
Waterloo.
All right. And it's effective?
Great.
All right.
Great. And the biggest problem is that we don't let visitors in,
Ah.
and we don't force people to live there.
I want to talk about something that touches on the homelessness that may get a little sensitive, but I want to first introduce a little bit of my perspective on this and where it's coming from, because I feel like I have a very unique perspective on this, and I'll tell you why.
Mm-hmm.
Did I ever tell you that when I was a kid, I grew up in Toronto, and growing up, we had, and it also sounds funny, we had a homeless man that was living on our porch.
Okay.
Did I ever tell you this?
Never.
So we had a homeless man that was living on our porch. His name was Clayton.
What?
Yeah, this was
Listen, this is not funny. This is not funny.
No. It's listen.
His name's Clayton.
His name is Clayton. Okay, and like this was honestly a very unique experience for me, and I didn't realize that it was unusual until I got to high school. It was only when I got to high school that I'm like, oh, it's apparently weird to have somebody living on your porch. Right? Okay, so here's what happened.
So he actually lived there,
full time, all the time. He was there. He would go out, have fun, come back, sleep on the porch. He had a sleeping bag there.
And you guys were just cool.
So here's the story. Okay, so my parents, we owned a bar. Okay, at some point, a bar and a restaurant. Okay. This guy came from BC, and he was like doing some odd and ends work. He came from a very wealthy family.
Yeah.
And he ended up bar hopping, drinking, and so he liked my dad. My dad, they connected, right?
Your dad probably liked him.
Yeah, my dad liked him, right? Yeah. But then at some point he said, he was out on work, and he's just like, "Do you have any work?" And my dad said, "Yeah, I'll give you some construction work that I'm doing."
That type of guy.
Yeah, exactly, right? He always likes to help whoever is down and under and needs a little bit of a hand, right? Yeah. So my dad helps him, gives him some work every now and then he'll go to the bar, drink his money away, come back. He obviously had a problem. And my dad encouraged him, tried to get him to seek help or whatever, but he didn't want it. One night, he comes to our house because my dad had him help us with construction there, so he knew where we lived. Comes to the house, knocks at the door, be like, "I'm just really drunk, and I can't make it home. And then can I pass out here?" And he was like, "Okay, sure. You can come inside." He's like, "No, I'm good here." So he falls asleep on the porch. Happens another night during the week. And then after a few weeks of this, he just started coming more and more frequently. And at some point, he just didn't leave. And I remember one time, I would see him sleeping on the porch. And when I was coming back in the evening, my mom would complain about it. And my dad would just put a blanket over him, right? And he would just sleep on the porch. And eventually, he had his own sleeping bag there. And that's how we started to realize that this became a little bit of a permanent thing.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want this to be taken into weird context, right? My dad was more like, I'm not going to interfere too much. Like he already restricted him in terms of coming to the bar and drink, but he didn't want to they built a connection. He didn't want to let him in to his home with his family.
Yeah.
But he knew the guy was harmless, so he didn't mind just letting him stay there.
Yeah.
And then that just became normal.
And he was happy with that. Clayton was happy with that.
My mom used to have conversations with him. He's like, "Clayton, listen, why don't you try to seek help? Or why don't you go to a shelter?
Yeah.
And he says, they don't let you drink in a shelter.
Yeah.
He says, why don't you stop drinking?
Yeah. I like to drink.
Stopping drinking is like telling me to stop living. And I remember the way he said it, and he explained it to me a couple of times too, because I'd get out there and I'd be on the porch, waiting for something, and then like he just make jokes. He'd tell me bar jokes. I know a ton of bar jokes from Clayton, and my mom learned a few too, and it was great. Right, we used to go telling them some of the best jokes I ever learned. He would tell me things, and I'd ask him questions like, where's your family? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And he had very provocative answers that were actually very deep and true to him. Like, without diving into it too much, the perspective of somebody who is living like that, do not expect yourself as a functioning person in society to be able to understand what they're thinking or what they're going through. And if you want to offer help to these people, offering them help in a way that you think is correct is not necessarily the way to help them. People need to be helped the way they need to be helped, not the way you think is right. And if you lack the perspective, you won't be able to help them.
Yeah.
A lot of the people, I think, at least, who are where they are there because they have certain preferences.
Yes.
We have a lot of facilities.
Sure.
When I went through nursing, I saw a lot of the facilities. They used to tell us where to tell people to go, and there was always rooms available. There was a lot of facilities available, and people have a million reasons why things aren't good enough for them, but they prefer to stay out in the tents. This is the thing: is that you make a statement like this, and it gets taken completely out of context because there are obviously people there who are definitely not there by choice.
Yeah,
this is where the overarching population shadows the rest, and then everything kind of gets jarbled. Having grown up where I did with Clayton as somebody who we viewed him as sort of something like in the family. Yeah. And then also having gone through nursing and having seen the safe injection sites, having had to volunteer and work in populations that were having trouble, I got a lot of interesting close-up perspective. And in so, I have an opinion as to how people need to be helped. Mm-hmm. And what they're doing is really more for what they think signals well to the community or to their voters.
Because it looks better in their neighborhood.
What do you mean?
When there's not an encampment, and that encampment turns into little tiny homes, it looks way better.
But these in tiny the neighborhood. Homes, listen, these tiny homes, I think you can mark my words today. I want to put this, I want to say this for the record today.
Yeah.
These tiny homes are not going to be managed properly. I think they're either going to get destroyed or burnt down, right? They're not going to last. Like if they're building what I think they're going to build, which is like they're going to buy them from Home Depot or something, those little ones, right? And I think they're only planning on accommodating 20 people or something?
Yeah, the 25? Waterloo one only has 50.
Yeah.
50, and there's a always on staff, there's a worker and a security guard that the city pays for. And it costs $2 million to open it for 50 units.
I really question the way that Hamilton is going to operate and manage this, because I see tons of things that, they don't manage that well, and it doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. I really hope they do well with it, but the thing is that the community is very, very seriously against it. And the problem is, like what you said, is a lot of the visitors will come by, right? Facilitating things that are not good for the community. Like this one lady, she was just standing outside, I remember, because they had the meeting. They wanted to voice the concerns of the community, so they wanted to have that meeting. 300 or so people showed up. As one lady was there with a sign saying, "My kid plays on the playground, stepped on a needle."
Yeah,
what do you say to her?
Yeah.
Because we manage investment properties.
Yeah.
The city that's picking up the garbage.
Our workers need to have needle-proof gloves when they're doing garbage.
Yeah. That's nuts. That they have to have that kind of precaution. And it's not because the tenants are doing drugs.
No.
It's because needles get thrown into the garbage bins. This was the crazy thing to me when I was doing the nursing and when we were going through the safe injection sites.
Yeah.
This was the crazy thing. We're giving clean needles. The idea behind it is that you're going to reduce the spread of bloodborne infection. The thing is that we're not there all the time to always give them free needles. Yeah. And they still share, right? Yeah. So yes, you are reducing it a percentage. But now they have all these needles and they just throw them wherever. It's not like they're going to a Sharps container and throwing it out. So they take them and they walk in front of all these properties, they just throw them in the bins. And then when the garbage people come to pick up the garbage, they look at the needles and what do?
Not picking them up.
They don't pick it up, right? And they just put there and says, it's not, your garbage isn't sorted properly.
Yeah.
Right? So that's a problem.
I'm totally with you. And what I'm saying is that I think that there is, and I don't know the percentage. The percentage might be 1%, maybe 5%. I don't know. But I know that there is some people rough on luck living in those tents. Those people need some housing. And since they live in a tent, they get in all this classification of 95% of them are druggies and they don't want shelter help and they want to be Clayton, right? They just don't have a porch.
Because nobody would.
Yeah, nobody, right? Instead, we'll show up to the community hall, right? And we'll scream and yell and say, we need to get these guys out of here. And we'll move from one park to the next park, to the next park, to the next park. And we'll keep on doing the circle over and over again, right? Because they're not going anywhere. Winter's coming, every year it gets more and more in Hamilton. And I know when you grew up in Toronto and you had Clayton living on your porch, I never saw a homeless person like that. We used to go down Jackson Square. My dad used to take us. And that's when we would first see like homeless people. Like we never see them in the east end of Hamilton where I grew up.
Yeah.
Never. Now every corner, Main and Ottawa, panhandling, Main, Ottawa and Barton, panhandling, Kenilworth and all. Like,
now it's a very systemized thing, and it's odd because there seems to be certain locations where it's almost like there's a shift rotation. That's the whole thing. I don't even understand that.
They must know like the good time for traffic. There must be a bad time.
Yeah, but they're organized, obviously.
Well, yeah, because they don't want someone probably taking that corner, I would assume. Once I walked in on, Main Auto, which is probably pretty, like James and King.
And started panhandling.
James and Main, like these are like top-notch corners.
Yeah.
Bay and King, Bay and Main.
Yeah.
Right? These are good corners. Very good corners. The off-ramps, the 403 off-ramp at the West End.
Yeah, I know, but that's what I'm saying. It doesn't seem like, I don't know, it doesn't seem like the Wild Wild West like I thought it would be. It seems organized.
Yeah, I guess when you put it like that, yeah, it should be more like the Wild Wild West, but yeah, it does seem organized. Yeah, it does seem like
there's an understanding.
They're punching a clock.
Yeah.
They're punching a clock.
There's some kind of an understanding, right? It's
clock.
odd because I see people, it's like one person leaves, another person comes in, and they might be holding the same sign.
Yeah.
It's like picking up a shift. It's weird. But back to the whole thing is that like the way that certain cities try to address certain problems, I feel is very odd. And it's not necessarily what people who need help are actually seeking.
Yeah, I don't think anybody ever asked. I've read a couple stories on, there's one couple that lives in the woodland cabin there, and they can't go to a shelter because they have dogs, right? They're not taking drugs. The dogs just don't take them. How many people are like, and again, I don't know, but it seems kind of silly that we don't have a shelter for people that has a dog, or, I don't, and again, I don't know. Maybe it's too hard for the shelters to have, a little grassy area for the dog to go pee. I couldn't even make a decision if I'm saying I'm either going to be homeless or live without my dog.
No, but
it's a hard decision. I definitely don't want to be homeless.
Again, because I've traveled to different places, I feel like I've seen certain things, and I've seen the way people address homelessness and where they address it effectively and where they don't, right? And you can see where homelessness is prevented because of certain initiatives, right? Especially when it comes to community. The community thing, the thing that they tried to pilot in the North End also was they said, they put out this pilot for if anybody was willing to adopt one of the homeless people in their neighborhood by letting them live on their property somewhere. And I saw that. I'm just like, this is nuts. Even though my family's done this.
Right?
Even though my family's done this before, I know it's nuts to expect the community to want to do this. They're obviously not going to do this because too many things are unclear. At least when Clayton was living with us, we had rules, right, that he had to follow. First of all, no guests, no bringing people over. That's nuts. Right? You're not.
And he came to you. He asked you.
Yeah.
He asked you for the porch.
Yeah.
Instead of like, hey, we're taking away this place where you've been for months, and we're just going to place you in my backyard. Because everybody's sick of seeing you out in public like that. There's no way that person's just going to perform well in society.
No, right? And this is, but this is where I feel like the government is overstretching certain things, and I feel that there's a lack of community. I think if community was fostered more, people would care about what's happening to the people in their community, right? And you see this all the time in certain religious communities, culture communities, right? I have a couple of Filipino friends, right? And they approached me and asked if we're willing to accommodate one of their friends from church.
Okay.
Right? And that church community was willing to support them through extension through me to get them accommodated. Yeah, no, this looks very good to me. I'm happy to accommodate this person because he has the support of your group, and there's somebody else for me to call if there's any problems, right? He was an elderly gentleman, and like technically speaking, if he filled out an application, he definitely wouldn't pass the vetting process. But he came with the community. I would definitely get behind that, right? But this is where when the government starts to overstep, they start to dissolve the people's need for community. Things stop working the way they ought to, right? In Greece, in Greece where I grew up, you would never see this thing happen. If somebody was like that, somebody would come looking for them because there's a sense of people matter. But the thing is that you can't expect people to matter to just anybody. People matter to specific people. One of the ladies we used to work with, she said she had a brother who would end up on the streets. She would go out to find him. Why? It's not like she's looking for some homeless person on the street. She's looking for her brother.
Yeah, it's not crazy.
That's not crazy.
It's not crazy.
I think cities need to work on communities and let communities take care of their people. Don't overstep the communities and then try to take care of the people directly. Government doesn't know what the people need. Too disconnected. And on top of that, they're too disconnected.
Yeah. And they will never ask for opinions on how to write a bylaw.
No.
That will never be that will never be a thing.
No.
And that would solve a lot of our issues.
Yeah.
Right? And the new bylaw was that, tents can't be there can't be more than 5 tents in a park. That was the new bylaw that they enacted for to solve this. Like, they don't enforce that.
Oh, that's always the problem. Is that there are a lot of laws.
And so saying that there's 5 tents in the park, the moment that I see Gage Park, there's 4, I can just pull up my tent and camp in Gage Park.
Yeah, and then
I grew up near Gage Park. We just get kicked out at 11 o'clock. Cops are walking through Gage Park. Get out of the park.
Yeah.
You're not allowed in here.
There are things that become problematic. Enforceability always gets overlooked. It's like you make a rule, you make a law, but it seems like nobody thinks about how to actually uphold this, right? Because let's say you have 5 tents in the park, a 6th one comes in. How do you know who was there first?
Yeah.
Right? Do you have somebody there like a gatekeeper?
No, it makes zero sense. It makes absolutely
right. And then when there's 10, what do you do? Which 5 are you going to kick out?
Yeah.
Right, it's a problem. I think there was something done with respect to sleeping in parks.
Yeah,
where
and if Horvath could decriminalize anything, she would just decriminalize everything. She would just go rogue and be like, you know what, everybody can do everything. Just don't do it in my fucking neighborhood. That's what she would do.
There's this interesting thing that I read on like one random Facebook post, which really got me thinking. Because what they were saying, I haven't looked into it enough to see the extent of how true this is, right?
Yeah. Well, this is the fun part, right? When we don't have to look into it.
I don't know, but okay. So basically, this one guy was talking about how part of the people who are involved in the organization to do this community the tiny house, the hats, are apparently some really big time real estate investors who own property like in certain areas, And there's one guy saying that they're doing this intentionally because they want to devalue the North End. So get this. There's an episode on this TV show that I used to watch. It's called The Boondocks, right? If any of you haven't heard of it, it's a really hilarious show.
I like how we're going to loop this in together.
No, it's important. It's important. There was this one episode in The Boondocks where there was this, the main character is the granddad, right? And the granddad started making this really awesome burger. And the awesome burger was basically putting people into the itis, basically putting people into a food coma, right? And everybody loved this burger. This banker comes, or this investor comes rather, and I think he works for the bank or something. And then he says, "Hey, why don't I help to why don't I help you open up a restaurant?"
Yeah.
And after tasting his burger, and he says, "Sure, yeah, okay, let's do it." So he helps him open up this restaurant, and everybody's lining up from the neighborhood to get this burger.
Yeah.
And then shortly after, you start to notice certain stats in the neighborhood. People started getting itis. People started getting food comas, and people started getting lazy. People started getting fat. People started getting unambitious, not willing to go to work. People started running out of money. The neighborhood started to go down to the pits, right? So people start taking care of their lawns. People stopped taking care of their properties. People stopped going to work. And then the values of the property started to decline.
Yeah.
And then this investor went and bought up all the properties around the park. And then after he bought up all the properties around the park, he foreclosed or withdrew his investment from this restaurant, and the restaurant was forced to shut down. And so some of these guys, what they're saying is that they are trying to piss off the people in the community and devalue the neighborhood, because there's a lot of development that's happening in the Bayfront, right? There's a lot of things going up. There's a lot of initiatives, and there's a
lot of vacant land.
There's a lot of potential there. And think about it. If you live anywhere within the vicinity of Toronto and you want to be close to the water, how do you get close to the water? How can you live close to the water without paying an exorbitant amount of money?
Live in the hood.
The Bayfront is one of the last few places that you could that you could reasonably get into, right? And what some of these people are saying is that this group is trying to devalue the neighborhood so that they can buy in more and solidify a foothold in the North End.
We need to do some research, because I would love to call those people out. I would love to have them on the podcast. I would love to have them on the podcast.
I'd be all like, "What? Yo, this is brilliant. Did you learn this from the Boondocks?"
I can name off a bunch of different places that I think that are better suited for an encampment than the Tiffany Lands in the North End. Okay, there's lots and lots and lots of different spaces in Hamilton. So what you're saying, it makes total sense to me, because everybody wants to live in the Bayfront area. Having all the tents there, I wouldn't want to live there. I wouldn't want to live walking distance to that.
Yeah. What actually is going to become challenging is the people who have houses right across from where they're going to put those tiny homes, right? Imagine any of those people want to put their house up for sale. Who's going to buy that? No one's going to buy that. Well, I mean, we might. But
no, the Ancaster guy is going to buy it.
Oh yeah, probably. That's the thing, right?
Yeah, he'll buy it.
Yeah, maybe that's the plan, right? Maybe there's some land assembly going on that we don't know about.
We got to dig in deeper into that, because I would love to bust that wide open, because it makes total sense. Why would people in Ancaster care?
I remember when there were some people in the Bayfront protesting against the city allowing some of these encampments to continue. There were people who came from Ancaster and protesting the other protesters to allow this to happen. And they don't live there.
Yeah.
Right. But that's classic. I think that's one of the things that we always see happen. And it's just like the whole not in my backyard thing, right?
Yeah. I do know someone that drives a school bus, and we could charter the school bus to take all the encampment, take a small encampment and bring it up, to Ancaster. And we could start that. right? Because that's not fair. Let the politicians and the community fight, right? That's what should happen. A discussion should happen to take place, and it shouldn't be from, I live in Ward 3, you live in Ward 4. They're in Ward 4, so I'm showing up. That's
it should be localized. This is the whole thing about communities, right? That I'm talking about. One of my friends works in Ottawa, and he says that there are flyers that talk about the benefits of being in Hamilton, but they're geared towards people who are down on their luck, who are homeless or borderline homeless, and they're talking about the facilities. And he says, and honestly, like, I almost don't believe this, except I trust this guy, but he says that they will bus them over to Hamilton because of the facilities.
Yeah, Hamilton's always been a big city with welfare and ODSP, because we do have big offices. And this is, I think, pre-COVID, is that you just be able to walk in. Yeah. You could just walk in and talk to a social worker, and they get you whatever assistance you need, or see depending on the situation. And that's why everybody wanted to come to Hamilton, right? And we were close to Toronto, and you can get a cheap train to Toronto, right? Because again, when I grew up, there's no homeless people in it. Like there was. It just wasn't even close to being what it is today, right? And that's just 10 years, 15 years ago, which is a crazy leap. And then if you see in Toronto, is Toronto worse, or is it way worse?
Well, I mean, it depends, right? There's obviously way more. What I think is a difference when you look at Toronto and when you look at a place like Hamilton is strictly a visual difference. So in Toronto, there's a lot arguably better transit system than Hamilton, for example. And there's people walking around, people who are going to work walking around, and it actually masks the
it's busier. It's busier.
Yeah. Everybody in Hamilton, if you're working, chances are you're driving. Most of the people who are working are driving. Actually, that's what it looks like anyway, because there's not a lot of people walking around in Hamilton who look like they're walking to work.
Yeah, unless we're downtown.
And then the only person that you see is somebody who's having a really good time on whatever is banging around right now.
Yeah.
Right.
And he's not at work.
No, he's not at work. Right. He's not at work. So. And that's the difference, I think. I think it's just a matter of what is more visually apparent, right? So, but in terms of what's more, I actually have not looked into it. I haven't looked into the stats for this in terms of like what's more per capita or anything like that. But what I do know is what we see anecdotally here where we're working and where we live. The reason why I'm actually also a little bit skeptical about the way certain problems are approached is because of our experience with the city before when we wanted to help solve a problem. We remember when the pandemic first happened and we approached one of the counselors to see whether or not they would agree to work with us to accommodate 35 people who were homeless, and instead of trying to put them up in the freaking Hilton. Yeah. Right? Because what they were paying exorbitant amounts to accommodate these people. And we had buildings that we were able to help facilitate them. Yeah. And we went to a community group. We partnered with a community group. Yeah. We partnered with one of the church leaders who was going to bring part of their community in. We had our private industry, and we were going to work with the city to accommodate 35 people who were homeless. Yeah. And the city didn't want to work with us.
No, super frustrating.
And the thing is that why didn't they want to work with us? Now, I have some theories that I don't necessarily want to spin, but the fact that they weren't even willing to table the discussion told me that they weren't terribly interested in making this happen.
Yeah, they already made up their mind, I think, of what they want to happen. Their budget is not going to go to that. Yeah, we're not spending money on that.
But that is the problem. They skip people trying to help people. They're just like, no, we'll help people directly. Yeah. They just can't help people directly. Yeah. The only help that they can ever do is give money or take money. Yeah. And that obviously that's obviously like a swinging ball if you've ever seen one.
Yeah. And we're on the other side of that. Our property tax is going to go up crazy. Our water charges are going up crazy. 20% they're talking. So we're just, we're on that pendulum swing of that's the city we live in. We don't want to fix the problem. Treasury with more money.